for the first house episode.
Mm-hmm.
We are, for archival purposes, June 10th, 2024, and we're 11:14 right now, and I'm in Whatcom County, Washington. We still got some good planets in Gemini here. Got Jupiter, Mercury, and Venus in Gemini, so we're doing
Mm-hmm.
good.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about like the technical side of the first house. And with that being said, it's going to be really hard to talk about the first house without addressing the ascendant. So I guess we'll talk about the differences between those first. And starting out with house systems. So I know we've both kind of dabbled, looked at charts in other house systems, but I think primarily we both use the whole sign house system.
Mm-hmm. Mainly
Um,
because I found it easier to use because you can
right.
do it like without seeing their chart, right? To use Placidus, like you have to actually have the chart really to know. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
it's like if I know, oh, they're Gemini rising, then I can figure out, oh, I know what is in
Exactly.
every house.
Can
So
be easy math for sure.
yeah.
And astrology is complicated enough. Can we have one easy
Yeah.
win where we can visualize a chart off of our head and not, calculate degrees? So, just a little soapbox is that there is no right house system. I honestly feel I've looked at a lot of things and it can be jarring if you see your chart in another house
Yeah.
system and you're like, I've never been a blah 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 rising. How
Yeah.
dare you accuse me?
Yeah.
I think once you dive into the archetypes more and learn the signs better and all the ways a planet can manifest, because it's, I mean,
Hmm.
maybe not learning all the ways because it seems pretty infinite. Like they have their restrictions, but there's so many ways that things can manifest. And if we can be open minded enough to view our lives in different lenses, then I do believe that each house system is correct in its own merit, right? And it just depends on you using it. So the reason we chose, it's easy to learn, and if you stick with it long enough, you can visually map out a chart fairly quickly. So it's user pending, user preference. There's no wrong answer.
Hmm.
We all come to our own conclusions that are meaningful to us.
Yeah, like I've looked at my chart both ways, and in both things I found stuff that I really resonated with. I mean, it was interesting because for me in whole sign, so many of my planets are in my first house, but when I go to Placidus, a lot of those planets are in my 12th house, and Sagittarius and Gemini are both taking up two houses there, and then Leo and Aquarius just don't show up. They don't have a single house to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, because they're intercepted, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's interesting. Like I found things though when I was looking at it that made sense to me in both of them. And I think I ended up, it's been a while since I looked at my chart in Placidus, but I think I ended up coming to the conclusion that they showed different things for me. Like the whole sign as like a chart system where showed the like idea of who I was like as a person, whereas Placidus was more like the events of my life. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
remembering that right, because it's been a while since I looked at them. But it was almost, oh, like I could use these systems if I was looking at different things, like if I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to get something different out of them. So
Yeah, that's a really interesting take too, because I've definitely heard other astrologers say, yeah, if I'm looking at for elections or for certain things, then I'll use this house system. And yeah, no wrong answers. That's great. My chart is not unique, but fairly unique, as a lot of things don't really change when I switch over. I think the only things that change are my Mars and my Jupiter, I think, switch houses. But when interpreting them that way, it makes sense to me also. So I've dabbled with Porphyry, Placidus, and of course, whole sign is what I'm predominantly using. But yeah, definitely you can take so many insights to whatever house you're using. And sometimes it clears up like, oh, well, if this is what I'm taking from looking at my chart in porphyry and I go back to whole sign, you can just add an element of spice. Yeah, that does make sense in this context too, but here's some little added nuggets of wisdom that I now can see.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so that's our house,
Hmm.
our short house system soapbox rant. Maybe we should do an episode on house systems and like the differences and
Yeah.
like how they're calculated. Like a deep dive into house systems would be cool.
And like a chart comparison of
Yeah, for
what does
sure.
the chart look like in those different houses? Like, how can they both be accurate? Because I think that there are a lot of things like that where people have questions like that, or like with twins or things like that, right? Where it's,
Hmm.
oh, well, how can this be like, how can astrology be accurate when these things exist? But I think that there are ways to explain those things. So, so yeah, I think that
Absolutely.
that would be interesting to look at. So,
I completely agree. So, going forward, we're using whole sign house system. And then in this system, like we said, it's fairly easy. You just simply find the sign where the ascendant point is based on the time of the chart. And then that entire sign becomes your first house. And then the next sign in zodiacal order becomes your second house, so on and so forth. So once you know axis is Sag Gemini as an axis, and if you're a Sag rising, your Gemini house is going to be your seventh house, and you can just map it out that way. Or if you memorize the order of the signs. So the first house can also be called your rising sign, right? So for those who aren't familiar, sometimes you'll hear the term big three thrown around or get asked, hey, what are your big three? The big three refers to the signs of a person's sun, moon, and then their rising sign or the ascendant sign. So, rising sign and ascendant sign are fairly interchangeable to me, but we just have to remember that the ascendant is an actual point on the chart. It's a degree point versus including the entire ascendant sign or rising sign is the full 30 degrees in this instance of the zodiac sign. So if the ascendant marks the exact degree of the moment of your birth, your emergence into the world, your dawning on this lifetime. It's the eastern part of the sky where everything is rising from, and that's where the term rising sign comes from. And later on, we'll look at different things, but a cool thing to think about is the ascendant descendant axis will become the horizon of the chart. So when just glancing at a chart, you know whether it's daytime or nighttime if you see the sun above or below the horizon, right? So just a cool little tidbit. And then the word horoscope, I feel like has lost its true meaning because we're just like, oh, well, read my horoscope in a magazine or whatever, right? But horoscope is actually comes down from an ancient Greek term, and don't ask me to pronounce it because I don't speak Greek. But
horoscopos.
yeah, something like that. I've seen it spelled a few different ways too, so I'm not even sure. But Greek origins, and it translates to either time observer or hour marker. So in this instance, I feel like the ascendant would be the horoscope versus just like the whole chart and in its entirety, I guess. Because the ascendant marks the exact moment and it's like the fastest changing element in the chart because your ascendant sign can change every 2 hours or so. So
Mhm.
that's why it's really important to have an accurate time for any chart you're pulling. Obviously, there's valid learning and tidbits you can find when just pulling a chart at any time. If you don't have
Mhm.
a time, a lot of astrologers pull a noon chart because then you're like halfway during the day and there's a little less variance that can arise. But if you're interpreting, like if you're looking at your own chart, if you're interpreting things that you really want to be accurate with the time.
Yeah. because having the houses set up is the so important for knowing, because when you pull it up and it doesn't have the houses, then it's just you can see the planets that are in what signs and stuff like that, but you don't really, I don't know, I find the houses to be so helpful when I'm like thinking about what those signs are like doing or what how those things are like showing up in my life. So, or like to do synastry or anything like that is necessary. So,
Agree. Yeah. It's definitely astrologer pending on where they put weights of things. Like I know some astrologers just read planets and signs and you can get a
mhm,
ton of insights that way. But I'm definitely on the same boat as you, Michelle. Like houses for me, it's the thing that brings it down to earth and you can be like, no,
mhm,
this definitely is an energy that shows up in my work life, or this is an energy
mhm,
that shows up in my neighborhood. Like you can pinpoint where you're going to likely find these themes, or these planets can also be other people if you're
mhm.
interacting with people. Oh, I find more Saturnian people in my seventh house or something like that. I find, I mean, it's all important really, but I find a lot of importance in house accurate housing. Housing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's why we
Why we're here.
little project was about the houses. So I'm very interested in
Yes.
the houses, obviously, but it's
Yes, we're starting out our venture using strictly houses. So, when listening to other astrology content or reading books or whatever, usually books will explain what they mean, but listening to people on YouTube, other podcasts and stuff, the term ascendant can sometimes be used as like a lump or an umbrella term. So you just want to be really careful. Like I said, the ascendant is the exact degree, and the sign is the full 30 degrees of whatever sign it's in. So just be careful. Some people might lump together the ascendant points, some planets close to the ascendant point, or even in the first house for that matter, the complete rising sign. And sometimes people will even lump in the ruler of the first house, which, if you're learning, can be really confusing, I think. And we want to differentiate. These all have specific jobs, and it's not like just a lump sum of one under the one term, right? I don't know. So, because of all this, the first house sets up the chart. Like we're saying, this is super important to have an accurate hour marker, because from there on, we're setting it as the first house and we're creating the entire chart from this time. So, the moment you were born, this chart is born, and therefore the ascendant and the first house created, and it governs the entire placement of every house, right?
and it's also why I think sometimes people don't think that their horoscopes are accurate, right? Because usually horoscopes are just sun sign astrology, right? So if you have a
Mm-hmm.
different sun sign from your rising sign and you're looking at what's happening for Taurus this month, but you're a Libra rising, then it's because the way that like that's being determined of what's happening for that sign that month is what planets are in that sign. And so
Yes.
if you're a Libra rising and like stuff is happening in Libra's like sixth house or something, like that's what the horoscope is going to be about, right? And so it's not going to maybe be as relatable if your sun sign is like Taurus. And so, I mean,
Yeah.
for me, I think it was easier because for even before I knew
Yes.
any of this, right, my sun sign and my rising sign are the same sign. And so I'm always just looking at Sagittarius stuff and it's fine. It's usually going to be fine for me. But I think if you have different sun and rising, which is probably the case for most people, there's that thing of, oh, well, you may relate, you may not, because depending on how your sun is placed, then like,
Absolutely. Like discovering my rising sign was phenomenal because it, so my rising and sun are complete opposites. I'm Leo rising, Aquarius sun. And so those two obviously have a connection, right? They obviously have a relationship to each other as an opposition. But reading an article about Aquarius, it resonates because it's enough about we're talking about the same axis, but they're probably talking about me in first person, this is going to happen to you. Which
Mm-hmm.
sometimes happens, but in my chart, my sun is in my seventh house of the other person. So I'm likely to see the themes they're talking about, just not in the way they're talking about. They're like talking about it's happening to me when maybe it's happening to my partner or my coworker or some other person in my life. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, differentiating, okay, rising sign and sun sign, super, super important. So, another technical point about the first house, because apparently I'm all about the technical stuff, is the first house is the joy of the planet Mercury. And so, if we're looking, like, if you listen to our last few episodes about the 12th house, we talked about the 12th house equating to like childbirth and labor and stuff like that. Um, then the first house coming off of that, right? The next one would be the house where we first appear into the world. So the first house can sometimes be called the I am house, but I think this is speaking to that union of coming from the womb and then the spirit is placed into the body and birthed into the world. But I think it's a really interesting thing to think about with Mercury having joy there is like the act of tactical stimulation that doctors do when you first come out. They hold you upside down and they spank your bottom. I don't even know if they do it that way anymore, but they
Mm-hmm.
stimulate that airflow because you need to start breathing in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And so most of the time, that's an initiation of like your baby's first vocalization or your like the first time that they are communicating to the world. And I think that's a really cool look at Mercury having a role in the first house. And then another cool thing about Mercury is that in like myths, Mercury is the only god in Roman and Greek. He goes by different names, Hermes, whatever. But he's the only god that can freely cross back and forth between the underworld. And so it takes this other toll of we're going from this dark womb by yourself place of seclusion into the outside world, like into
Mm-hmm.
the real world, if you want to call it that. So I thought that was a cool equation
Mm-hmm.
also.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
So, what topics are we talking about when we talk about the first house? So many things. Side note, all about them side notes too. if we anything we talk about on this podcast or like anything with the houses is never a strict like fully encompassing talk, right? Like these things can span a bunch of different areas, but we're trying to give you an overview of how some of these themes can play into different houses, but it's never an exhausted list, right? We have many things to cover.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the first house can deal with the image or the first impression that you project onto others, like your outward personality. And this is important to remember that it's an outward personality. Like, we might not always see it ourselves, but it's something that is really portrayed to other people. Because I've come across people and I've pulled their chart who don't know much about astrology, and I go, okay, these are, your big three that we're talking about. These are your big three. You are a Leo rising. So you might come off to people as warm and cheerful and blah, 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 blah. And some people just don't resonate with that. And I think it goes back to you have other placements in the chart. If something else is resonating for you at that point in time,
Mm-hmm.
you don't really think about how you come off to other people, right?
And you may not even know. I think sometimes, depending on how we see ourselves or how aware we are of like other people or something, we may not know how we come across to other people.
Yeah. Another way to think about this outward personality to me is like getting ready in the morning. So we all have like different ways of approaching different areas of our life, right? And as we go through this house system, you'll see that it's based on the areas of life of the house that we're dealing with. But in this case, for the first house, and we're talking about that first impression you give others, I think about like how we get ready in the morning. Like we'll get
Mm-hmm.
ready if we're going to work, we're wearing a certain attire. Maybe we're fixing our hair a certain way. If we have a uniform we have to go to work in, or if we're going to the store, maybe we're like more laid back, more casual, whatever. And so the first house kind of deals with that image that we're presenting forward for whatever is happening in life, right? And just because we go out looking all done up or whatever we do, that is us, there's still people that come home and strip, like, we take off our makeup, take off our bra, take off our shoes. We're a completely different person in different areas of life. And that's also that thought of we may not really put much thought into what we portray as we're going out. It could just be natural. Oh, I'm a wash and go hair person. And we don't really think that's a quality that could be in our birth chart. Like, that's a quality that can show up in our rising sign type deal. So, either way, it's like that outward mask or that idea of putting on your face before you show yourself to the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Another kind of analogy that I was given about the first house is, say an astrologer was invited to their friend's party, like it's a birthday party, they don't know many people there, but they decided to attend, and then other
Mm-hmm.
people like find out that they're studying astrology or whatever, and they're just like, ooh, guess my sign, right? And yeah, the astrologer with all their knowledge and stuff would probably guess a sign, but most of the time, the person without knowing the other people are going to guess their rising sign because that's the forward facing first impression. And then, of course, the party goers, because I mean, there is an influx of people that know their big three now, but
Mm-hmm.
there's still a lot of people that don't know their rising sign. And so they're probably just gonna be like, no, sorry, I'm an Aquarius. When of course you're like showing as a Leo or showing as a
Right.
whatever, right? So I think that's really interesting. We're many different things. We present in many different ways, but our first impression to strangers is
Mm-hmm.
what's showing up in the first house.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting because I feel like if you're going to guess somebody's signs, right, it's either going to be their rising sign, their sun sign, or if they have a stellium, right? Because it's going to be like
Mm-hmm.
whatever is like showing up the most for you. What do you have a lot of those energies? But usually I feel like people's signs make a lot of sense, like they're the rising and the sun, because I'll see like when I get to know somebody, right? Sometimes I'll start getting a lot of content on TikTok or Instagram that's like that thing of, oh, like, how do you know somebody is like a Capricorn or this or that, or right? And then I'll find myself looking at them and being like, oh, do I see these traits? And a lot of that stuff, like, is just silly stuff. Like, it's not necessarily a lot of the content that's on Instagram or TikTok is that sort of like pop stuff of oh like all Sagittariuses love to travel and are flighty and you can't hold them down or something, right? But there will be stuff that kind of consistently comes up again and again, and it's always interesting for me when I can really see somebody like in the sign where it's like oh yeah, like you very much are this sign, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then I've noticed that I can see it with both the rising and the sun sign for a lot of people that it's, oh, it makes a lot of sense to me that like that you have this sun sign, but also like the rising sign I can clearly see coming through in the way that like you like present yourself or interact with people or something like that. So,
Yeah, totally. Another cool way, one of my teachers, mentors, Karen Holmaker Zontag, she teaches this concept of the meet and greet personality as the drawbridge to the castle, which I thought was a really cool way to think about it. When you come across a stranger and you don't know them, right? say you're just if we're thinking about castles, you're like traveling in the desert or in the forest, you come across this castle, you first see the gate or the drawbridge, right? And what is the tone of that drawbridge? Does it look welcoming? Does
Mhm.
it say beware of moat or something crazy? We have dragons, stay back. So she asks us to think about the rising sign as our welcome sign to people. You have to get past that welcome sign or not welcome sign, depending on how we're presenting, to be able to come into the castle and really get to know the person. And then once you're in the castle, then we're meeting things like our sun and our moon and like all of our other planets once we're like getting to know each other on a deeper level. But the rising sign being your front door. Is it
Mhm.
tidy? Is it messy? Is it welcoming? Is it private type? What tones are you giving to the
Like,
visitors that come to your castle?
it's like Scorpio rising. There's just like 5 locks on the door and like, go away. Not, I don't want what you're selling.
No soliciting.
Yeah.
We love you, Scorpio. This is good.
I mean, I'm all about Scorpio. I'm
Yeah.
all about Scorpio. So
Okay, so another thing that our rising sign, first house, ascendant, all the good things can deal with is our body shape and our appearance and like our style, our physical movements and gestures. And when I say physical movement and gestures and a type of self expression, I don't want it to be confused with the Venusian expression, which of course we'll talk about. I'm sure after we're done with the houses episodes, we'll go into planets episodes and we'll get there down the road. But this is more talking about what we're talking about, that outward facing mask we're wearing and how it can show up physically. So we're talking not just the tone of our welcome sign, but the physiology of our self. So the first house also can deal with the head and the face. Each house has like a bodily correlation, and I don't really use those in my practice and my interpretation because the signs also have a correlation to body parts. But I do use the body in the first house context because like we're talking about, it's your first step into the
Mhm.
body when you're being born, you're first coming into the world. So in that aspect I use it. But if we're looking at the body parts associated with the first house, it's the head and the face. And so sometimes your rising sign can physically manifest in the way you look, like your body shape. So, for example, if we're looking at like a Cancer rising, some Cancer risings have a round face shape because Cancer is ruled by the moon, which I think is really interesting that it's like physical.
Mhm.
And then another example, of course, going back to me because I'm a Leo rising and everything's got to be about me, right? Is sometimes Leo rising have an emphasis on hair. Like before we started recording, I'm like, I need to fix my hair, but the camera's backwards and I can't fix it, but it's whatever. So Leo risings can have like a thick head of hair like me, have a lot of hair, or it could just be the way the person is styling it and presenting that forward facing appearance. Or it can be just fullness, because if we think about Leo being a sign that's represented by the lion, and the lion has thick mane, right? It's a head feature that's something in the forefront. I don't know how to say that. Something apparent, like super in your face when you see somebody
Mhm.
for a first impression.
I mean, I do. Leo rising, it's one of the things I guess about people. You must have some kind of Leo placements. Whenever I see that they have like a really good, like thick, full head of hair, like where it seems to be like the feature that they're like, I don't know if proudest of is the right, but like, like the kind of thing that like when you like
I
something
mean,
about
pride
yourself
is very
is the
Leo.
thing. I mean, it's like the kind of thing that, like how everybody has like a thing where it's this is the thing I like about myself, so I can emphasize it because this is the thing that like I want to show off for people. For me, like it partly is my hair. I do sometimes if I'm really, I either love my hair or hate my hair. But like when I love it, I really like to emphasize it. And then my legs, I think, are the other thing that I'm like, I like my legs. Those are the two parts of my mouth. I'm like,
I like
I'm
it. Well, you do have a Leo
Sagittarius.
moon,
It's true.
so like some security is wrapped up in your Leo appearance, being your Leo hair. So that makes
I
sense for
do
sure.
have kind of an emotional connection to it too. Like it's
There you
very
go.
like it's very hard for me sometimes. I'll grow it out for a really long time and I'll like the whole time I'll be like, "Oh, I want to cut it." It's like too, but I'm like, "No, I can't cut it. I can't cut it." And then I cut my hair not that long ago for the first time in quite a while since where I'd been growing it out for a minute and I felt simultaneously relief, like because of getting rid
Mm.
of all that stuff. Because I always feel that thing of I feel like I'm cutting years off of my hair. Oh, I'm done with this part of my life, which I think is associated a lot where people are like, oh, you're going through a breakup or whatever, right? And so you like do these big changes to your hair. And so there's that definite like emotional connection that I feel to my hair where it's like I feel like I'm cutting off years of bad emotions or things that I don't want anymore. So I
Mm-hmm.
had that sense of relief. But when I looked at the mirror, like I like it, but I don't like I miss my long hair. I like having it like especially because it's like curly. Like I'm trying to work on my curls. I want it to be as big and like curly as possible.
Yeah, emotional storage for a moon there is very on point. That makes sense. I know a lot of indigenous people say you store your wisdom and your memories. So,
Mhm.
like, if you're not doing good with those memories and you want to get rid of them, for sure. And then, in terms of like physical movement, because, like I said, for me, the first house doesn't just stop at the head and the face, it's more like I'm encompassing this body. And so, we talk about physical movements and gestures and stuff can show up in the way people like literally walk or the postures they naturally gravitate to. So, say you're like a fire sign rising, which we both are. Some of these people can like naturally walk fast, have a faster gait than people.
I'm always getting called out for that too. And it's silly reasons why, but it's true. Yeah, it's definitely faster.
Well, I've always walked faster, and I thought it was just because I was like taller. I'm like, oh, I have longer legs than all my friends. It's fine. But like you and me, we walk fast. Like, we're not the same height.
Because I'm a Sagittarius, so I have like horse legs. I'm like,
Mm. Yes, I love that. I'm galloping.
get me to my destination.
I would like to pick up the more like sensual lioness prowl where it's like not so much just quick, but like, nice and moody. But no. Or for another example, say a water sign walking would be more flowy or more like glidey type deal. So it's interesting to see people in that light too and see where you can pick up on their physical mannerisms and how they could equate to their first house sign.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so another thing the first house can speak to is the way we lead, like what we lead with, and like our approach to life or our life views. So the sign gives a little flavor or mood to our approach to life or like the lens in which we see our world through. And that can show up in how we respond to life, not only how we like approach it, but how we respond to it, whether emotionally, mentally, physically, all the things. And of course, like we talked about earlier, how we appear to others. But if you think about the first house sign being like the lenses we see the world through, it's interesting this our view, their view concept, because if we're wearing like rose tinted glasses, we're clearly going to see the world tinted pink. But the people looking at us also will see our eyes, at least, tinted pink. So it's this cool, what we put off is mirrored back to us type deal. For example, myself, need to dive more into more charts, but I'm the master of my own chart, so I'll share my insights. I, as a Leo rising, tend to have more of an optimistic view on life, and therefore that's how I approach things. I'm really good at finding the silver linings in all my experiences, and for the most part, I feel like I come off as a person who's smiling often, person who's warm and wears their heart on their sleeve. So that's like a just overarching general way I approach life in more positive, optimistic light.
I feel like I approach life. I'm very curious about life, right? Like I feel like I'm open to everything, like in terms of like experiences or the way that I think about things always tends to be like from a kind of like philosophical point of view. Like I as much as like when I was in college and I went to many years of it, I had to take multiple philosophy classes and those are always some of the hardest classes, but also the ones where I came away from them really able to like think about life differently. And I really liked this. I remember in one of my classes, we read this book by this guy, Montaigne, and it's just essays. And he's basically like the father of the essay or whatever, right? And he just used to, he was some rich guy and he was back hundreds of years ago and he was just writing these essays so that he'd have his shower thoughts and he'd write them down and now they're in a book, right? And so I was like, being in that class and reading that was like so mind-blowing for me because it was like literally anybody can do this. I
Hmm.
feel like a lot of the time we think of philosophy or philosophers as like, oh, they're always like old dead white guys. Those are the ones that tend to be the ones that we like see the most of in college and stuff like that, right? And humans too, but it was like, oh, almost like you had to have some kind of special people were philosophers, right? Like you had to have something to be able to do that or to like get
Mm-hmm.
people to listen or something. And I was like, no, these are just this guy's shower thoughts. I've had these thoughts, right? And so I was like, I could be a philosopher. Anybody can be a philosopher, right? And so I think that's how I tend to like approach life is just like, well, all experiences are like interesting and I want to experience as much as possible and learn as much as possible because how do you know anything? Nobody knows everything. There's so much to learn. So I think that's
Yeah.
very Sagittarius, right? This idea of I just want to learn everything and there's always more to learn and there's always but specifically philosophical big idea kinds of things, right? I don't necessarily care about learning all the minutia of every kind of topic necessarily, which I feel is a more of a Gemini air sign kind of a thing, right? Where I want to learn about these topics. I'm going to learn about little things. I know somebody who's a Gemini rise and he's always listening to podcasts and he has all these little facts that those are things, right, that are Gemini. Whereas I feel like I want to look at the big picture, this like philosophy, and I'm going to figure out how the world works. What is this greater understanding of who we are as people or what it means to be a person on this planet or something?
Yeah.
And so I love shows like The Good Place, right? Which I
Oh,
feel has
freaking love
that.
the good
Like
place.
to me, The Good Place is like such a great like Sagittarius mind because it's all philosophy. It's just him. It's like, how are you a good person? What does it mean to be a good person? And when there are these different challenges and stuff, and looking at different points of view for what it means to be a good person. And those are the kinds of discussions I really like to have or things I like to think about. So I feel like that's very Sagittarius rising to me.
Nailed it on the head for sure. I mean, and you have such a stellium there, like like you also have Jupiter there, which is the ruler, so it's like really at home, really deep diving and
Mm-hmm.
expanding on this idea of exploring all the possibilities. Ugh, Cheaty, my love. I think of you every time I drink almond milk.
Oh my, I love Chidi. I
My
love
Venus
Chidi.
is in Sag, so I'm right there with you. I'm attracted to all those giant, big picture, what is the meaning of life? What are we doing here type enter astrology, right? I
Mm-hmm.
need to have some deeper meaning, some connection making.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes. Yes. Again, I love The Good Place. I think I've watched it like 4 times now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've watched it a few times on my shelf. I show it to other people. I love to have discussions about it after. It's like one of those shows that
Mm.
I feel like is really good to like you watch an episode and then let's discuss. Let's talk about what happened in the episode. Don't you feel like
Also Sagittarius. Love that. I was just introduced to, I mean, this is a really random side note, but I just finished The Courage to Be Disliked, which has been on my list for a really long time, but I didn't pick it up because of the title. But I felt like right now I needed, okay, The Courage to Be Disliked. Not what I got. Like, it's completely, have you read it?
Have not.
Okay. It's based on Adlerian psychology and or arguably Adlerian philosophy. And so, man, mind blowing. And I finished it in 2 days, and then I got the second one, which is The Courage to Be Happy. Brilliant. Just turn your belief systems on its head and really we'll go into this a little bit later, but I'm currently in my Hanged Man year for my
Mm.
tarot cards. And I think this is the pivotal point where I'm like, this is my new perspective now
Oh,
on
wow.
things. It really did. It just made me picture the Hanged Man card when I said turn it on its head, because I don't know, it's what I needed. And it might be a book that it will be a book I need to read multiple times, but it might be the book or books, because I enjoyed both of them, that I'll read at least yearly, which is pretty cool.
Hmm.
So, and Adler and I have very nice chart symmetry. So I'm like, ooh, what is this guy? But anyway, side note on awesome philosophy stuff. But okay, so yes, the lenses in which we view life, first house. And then also the first house can talk about just our motivation in general for living. Like you're talking about, I want to learn all the things. I want to get to the deeper meaning of things, see the bigger picture. Some may say that we choose when we enter this life, say the concept of a soul contract or something like that. And if that's so, then because of the time element of the chart, we're choosing our rising sign. Therefore, we're choosing our motivation for this lifetime. And I think that's a really interesting thought. The fact that our rising sign can symbolize this inner drive or inner meaning that we want to carry in this lifetime. And so going back to Leo rising, whatever. I'm over it. I'm over it. Leo can be all about like playfulness and recreation. And I think the biggest lesson for any Leo placement is vulnerability.
Mhm.
And so if I look at this take on, I chose to be here at this time, therefore I chose to be a Leo rising, my motivation for life would be Leo E, Leonine.
Mm. Hmm.
I need to figure out the
Yeah,
words
what?
for all these signs, because I can say some of them and other ones I don't think I've heard said. So if I chose this life to live in a leonine fashion, or however you want to say that, then um, my approach to life, my motivation for life would be a life filled with like childlike wonder and authenticity and sharing my vulnerability for the sake of others. And when I think about life that way, I wouldn't say I consciously set out to do that, because obviously we'll never know. But it does feel very resonant to how I live and how I wish to live my life.
Hmm.
So it's a really cool thing to think about, this like motivation for living type deal.
Yeah. I guess, I don't know. I feel like I guess by the way I live my life and what I was just talking about in terms of like how I show up in the world. It's to, I guess, have those conversations and share that knowledge with people, because ultimately, like being like my thing is I was like, well, if I had limitless money, or like money wasn't an option because we live in a different kind of society, then I would just go back and get degree after degree. But also, what I love to do and what I ended up doing in terms of like a career path, right, is to teach, is to talk about those ideas and to try, because even though I don't teach like philosophy or anything like that necessarily, I insert those things like into my classes, like into my literature classes, or I try to get my students to think about things differently by doing research and expanding their critical thinking skills. Like those are things that are important to me because what I think it means to be like a good person, right? Or part of that is to like care enough about the world we live in and other people to learn enough to be able to do better, to like, be show up as the best person you can in the world. And I think you need good critical skills to do that. So like I feel
Yes.
like that's my way of like, and even to just get people to think about things differently than they might otherwise think about them. So that's
Yes, absolutely. So another interesting way of thinking, because when we're thinking about motivation for living, a lot of people are like, well, isn't that like your sun sign? And this is where that confusion of sun sign and rising sign can happen. So one way of thinking is that your sun sign can be your destination, right? Like you're on a path in this life to do the sun. You're sunning. I'm Aquariusing, you're Sagittariusing. Whereas the rising sign is going to be your vehicle to get to that destination. So, to get to my ultimate Aquariusness, I need to Leo the whole way there. I need to approach life in a Leonarian, what is it? In a Leo fashion to become the Aquarius I need to be. And it's really interesting. I actually want to look into personally chart. This is another side tangent. Personally, I want to look into charts because my sun is in my seventh house, which means I attract, well, it can mean a lot of things. One of the things I've thought about is I attract people who are their authentic selves. And I've known that a lot of my close friends have sun in the first, which means they're wearing their authentic vitality on their sleeve and their forward facing appearance. So you make perfect sense when you were talking about teaching because your direction, your destination is Sagittarius. You're doing it as Sagittarius manner and you're finding that deeper meaning. How can I give back to life? How can I be generous? Which is your Jupiter also in your first house. So it
well, Jupiter's
all
in my
ties
fourth,
in.
but
Oh, your Jupiter's in your
yeah,
fourth?
Jupiter's in Pisces.
Wait,
So
what
it's
else do
still
you have
a,
in your first
I
house?
have, oh my gosh, I have, so my Mercury
Oh,
is in
Saturn.
Sagittarius, and my Uranus is in Sagittarius, and my Saturn is in Sagittarius, and my Sun is in Sagittarius.
Okay.
So it's four in my first house. But yeah, my Jupiter is in Pisces, but Pisces is also ruled by Jupiter. So technically there
Mm-hmm.
it's still in
That's
there.
true.
But it's interesting because I was thinking the way that I think about it is if we're looking at the houses and they're all the houses are like setting up where all these things are going to show up and all of that, right? That the sun, if like your rising is like how you're like showing up in the world and all that. The sun to me always feels like my ego part of that. It's like the
Mm.
part of me that I'm like attached to how I am like seeing myself or how I want to be seen by
Mm.
other people, especially because it is in Sagittarius and with all those other planets and stuff. And so I always feel I want to be seen in a similar way to how I feel I actually am. Like in the if somebody dislikes me, that's fine. I don't like that. I'm not the kind of person who likes discord or I don't want to be in conflict with people or whatever. But if somebody dislikes me, I want them to dislike me for the right reasons. I want them to dislike me
Yeah.
because of something that's true about me, not something that they've made up or something that they think about me that's not true. So I have a big problem with miscommunication. I don't like it when people think something about me that is not accurate to how I see myself. And maybe it's that I'm not seeing myself accurately or whatever, but whatever it is, I view that part of me as like my ego that it's, I want to be seen the same way that I see myself. I don't want to be seen by other people in a different way than I see myself. And so I feel like
Mm.
those two things, like being in the same place, has something to do with that. And then also Saturn being there. because I feel like Saturn
Mm-hmm.
restricts me from presenting myself authentically at times, or that where I feel I need to restrict myself because the Jupiterian energy is too much. Like I'm too much,
Mm.
I'm too loud, I'm too this and that. And I'm pretty introverted, but like I can be very loud and I can be very like boisterous. And I feel that there are times in my life where either because of other people or because of my fear of what other people will think, because of other people in my childhood kind of trained me to be this way, maybe, but that I was like, no, the right way to be is to be seen and not heard. The right way to be is to be like very contained and to be very like I watch and I wait and I see what other people are doing first. And then I like am like, okay, it's okay to express myself or something. And so I think that Saturn being there has always been a little bit of a struggle to me, and also to find myself because it's such long-term energy, right? And so
Mm.
I feel like it took me until my Saturn return to start being more okay, maybe I don't care as much. Like maybe it's just
Yeah.
I'm going to be who I'm going to be. And like, if you don't get me, you don't get me. Like, it doesn't matter. But it took me a long time. And even now, I'm still working through it to some extent. But like, it took me a while to get to that point because I always felt very restricted and very, oh, I have to be a certain kind of person to be like the right person. So,
Yeah, no, that's a great interpretation of Saturn in the first for sure. Or even Saturnian people making you feel restricted on how you can show up in the world and how you can be authentic in your presentation outwardly. So, yeah, that's a really cool way to think about it.
and I tend to collect Saturnian people since,
You sure do.
I'm real big on like anybody with a Capricorn placement or an Aquarius placement, especially Aquarius placements. I probably like almost everybody who I'm close to has some kind of either an Aquarius moon, Aquarius sun, Aquarius rising, or some heavy Capricorn placements. So I'm
Yeah,
like,
that's really interesting. And we'll definitely touch on that with those houses too, because I think that's a
hmm
third house type deal. But like I said, I collect Libras. That's my third house. But also, I think I'm starting to collect people with Sun in the first, which has been really eye opening because another I mean, I know we're supposed to be focusing on the first house, but I think it's still appropriate to point out that Sun in the seventh can lose their identity within relationships. And so, if I have a good example, say you, of somebody showing their Sun as their authentic presentation to the world, I have more of an idea how I'm able to continue to show my authentic self, but just in a way that's incorporating both my sun in the seventh and my rising sign, because especially because Leo is governed by the sun, so it always defaults back to what are you doing in relationships, are you losing yourself in relationships, how can you still be your authentic self within the confines of partnership. And that's been a huge lesson for me. And
hmm
so I think I'm collecting people with Sun in the first, which is really freaking cool if I think about it.
I mean, I think that those are the things that really interest me about charts because I don't think that they're things that are necessarily talked about a lot. Like when you go to look them up, it's not, I don't know, like how do you
Mm-hmm.
look that up? Or it's just like those
Yeah.
things that I started to notice. So it's one of the things I like about just like having my chart is just being able to see the people that I tend to interact with, the people that I tend to be in relationships with, or like friendships with, or get along with. What are the things that those people have in common? Because then it like lets because there's no bad sign. One of my least favorite things that I see online is the whole like listing signs and like terms of oh these are good signs or bad signs or
Mm,
never trust somebody with this sign or I won't be in a relationship with somebody in this sign or something
yeah.
because there are so many different factors to that. But I do think that what's useful is if you're noticing a pattern, right, of, well, people with this sign and I tend not to get along, what is the friction there? Like, why don't you tend to get
Right.
along? I think asking those questions can be really important instead of just like writing off a whole sign of people because it might show up differently if they have a Venus in that sign versus a sun in that sign or whatever, right? But it's why. What is it about those people that you don't get along with specifically? Like, how do they tend
Absolutely.
to like cause problems for you or vice versa? If we found like people that we do tend to get along well with, what do they have in common? What is it about those signs that's so interesting or useful? I wondered if it wasn't because to just go back to Placidus, the two signs that I have intercepted are Leo and Aquarius. And so it's
Mm.
almost, well, maybe it's because those signs aren't showing up as much for me or aren't like as in some way. But I don't know, just trying to like look at different patterns or see what might show up, like why might I need those elements? I know I need a lot of earth and a lot of air because I just don't have any in my chart. I'm all water and fire for the most part. So I have one planet in Capricorn holding on for dear life, and it's Neptune. So, like, I don't know, Neptune and Capricorn, that's probably not a lot of earth energy there. So, I'm like,
Holding on for dear life.
I tend to
Oh.
attract a lot of air signs as friends. I have a lot of air sign friends, and I think a lot of earth sign partners. So, I think that earth or water sign partners. And so, I think that I'm like always looking for people to fill in those gaps, maybe, or have a good conversation with. So,
Oh my gosh, I have so many things to add to that. So I'm not going to go into it, but I think it'd be useful for us after our house series, or maybe in the break if we do 1 through 6 or whatever, to talk about empty houses, or to talk about, because everyone has every sign in their
mhm.
chart, and the reason we might not get along with somebody of a sign is not their chart, is more likely our chart. I hate to throw it back on you, but but say for me, my we're still talking about houses, so it's okay. My Gemini house is my 11th house, which is normally correlated to friends, but just groups, right? So I have found out that I also have Chiron in the 11th house, and I will tell you that from middle school to mid to late, you can probably contest, mid to late 20s, I have always said I have no friends. That was a fucking motto, which is a horrible motto. But I had a wound in the friendship area, and if I'm walking around with this internal wound, thinking, because clearly it wasn't true. I had you for one. I had one great friend. Well, thinking that I had this Gemini wound, then when the Gemini people I meet are probably going to trigger that and probably going to just be like, poke, poke, and it's going to hurt. And then we're going to internalize that as, well, Gemini suck. Which
I mean,
I'm with a Gemini partner right now, and we're going 8 years. So like, it's more, what house is that for you? What sign is that for you? Because
mhm.
we have every sign, even if it's an empty house. And like I said, I think we should talk about empty houses at one point. But
I mean, yeah, and also to my Chiron is also in Gemini. The Gemini is my seventh house, and
mm,
relationships have always relationships and specifically communication within relationships has always been difficult for me since childhood. And so I think that in my relationships, and then I went a long time, right, where I felt like nobody wants to be in a relationship with me. I don't know what it is because I had a lot of wounds with like my past partners and like their intent in their relationships with me, I guess, and feeling like even the people that I had been with didn't really want to be with me, right? Didn't really want to be in a relationship with me. And then I went this whole long ass period of time, right, where it was like no relationships. Like I went 7, 8 years without dating, relationship, doing anything at all before I got into my current relationship. And that's where, so that's too, I think, shows how you can have the same, we both have Chiron and Gemini, right? But it hasn't shown up the same. And it's not that it's not accurate, it's that it's showing up very specifically in the house. And that's why the houses are so
yes.
important, right? Because
And that's why
Chiron
your
and
time is so
Gemini,
important.
right? It's like Chiron and Gemini, right? Like you can tell you something, but I think it tells us something a lot more specifically when we're looking at it in terms of our houses, because those wounds were very different for us, even if it was like in the same sign. So,
Yes. Ah, see, it all comes back.
mhm.
I
Yeah.
love it. Oh my gosh, so much juice, but we have to stay on topic.
This is why the other episode had to
So
be split into
difficult.
two parts.
Yes. Okay, so let's transition into first house perfection years. So perfections is an ancient Hellenistic timing technique where we look at what themes are going to play out for you come your birthday and that year. So perfection just means to advance or to progress. So basically, we're looking at how we can grow through our chart. So each birthday, we come a certain age, that age will highlight and activate a house for us for that year, birthday to birthday, right? So, for first house perfection ages, we're looking at the first year you were born. So we're looking at 0 until you turn 1. So we're looking at age 0, your months. And then we're looking at age 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, 72, 84, so on and so forth. Do you have any cool examples for first house years for you?
So let's see. First house perfection year. My last first house perfection year, I had a lot of health issues and I ended up, it was the year that I resigned from my position, my full-time position, to move states for a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And the last first house perfection year that I had before that, interestingly, was 2011. And that was, it was when I first, I think, started going back to college full time because I started going back to school in 2010, but I was only taking one class per quarter. I started going back to college full time. You and I moved in together for a while and we're living together. And I was like I published that the first thing that I ever published to Kindle for like a book that I was writing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I mean, my first house perfection years, there's definitely a lot that like happens in them. I
Well, you have a
don't
lot
know
of
if those
planets
are,
it's hitting as the year
yeah.
progresses, right? So, like Mercury, right? You have Mercury, so you're writing.
Hmm.
You have Saturn, so you're weeding out things like an old job that doesn't work with your new partnership and your new life you want to start. So, that all
Hmm.
makes sense.
Hmm. And Saturn, it was interesting too with the way that works because Jupiter had been in Pisces, and then Saturn was in Pisces after that, which is like my house of home and family and stuff. And that had a lot to do with why I was moving and like what that
Mm-hmm.
move looked like and stuff. So it definitely was like, can see it.
Yeah, for sure.
And the health issues, I also think make because like the health issues, since it's the first house and it's like your appearance and all that kind, I feel like the first and sixth house can both kind of correlate there.
Yeah, definitely. So, one of the things I didn't put in our notes, I just stuck with the body appearance, like mannerisms, but the first house can also just speak to your general health. And like you pointed out, it gets confused with the sixth house and or works in combination with the sixth house, however you want to
Mhm.
practice that. But I think that has a lot to do with the idea of you coming into your body when you're born, right? So, what body, what vessel, the state of that vessel you're inhabiting. I took it out of our notes, but general health is another significator of the first house. So,
Well, and two, Jupiter was in Taurus, retrograde in Taurus. Taurus is my sixth house. So
mm,
Jupiter, which rules my first house and my fourth house, like with
mm,
Saturn there, right? And then through the
yeah,
perfection year, but was in my sixth house. And so in retrograde in my sixth house while these health issues are going on. So I feel like there's a lot of
there's a lot
moving
of
parts. It's
pointing to
hard
yeah,
because I think with astrology, it's like never just one thing, right?
yes,
And that's part of why we can get off track so easily, like in the discussion,
yes,
because it's, oh, well, there's this thing happening here, right? But it's also going to affect like these other areas because the planets or sign or whatever that they're ruling. So,
exactly. Going back to the helm of the ship, if you don't have a solid first house, you can't see how everything is interacting
mhm.
within the whole encompassing chart, and you can't differentiate or isolate certain parts of the chart because it's a full functioning
Yeah.
system. So anytime we're ever talking about one part, it's in relationship with the rest of the
Yeah.
chart for sure. So for me, the year I was 24, I started kickboxing and dropped a crap ton of weight. Like a ton of weight. I went through a breakup and we still work together, not closely, but in the same building. And I was on a mission to just look fucking good. So I dropped a lot of weight, which made me start appearing differently. Obviously, my body shape is changing, but I'm styling myself differently. And I started buying things that I thought were closer related to how I wanted to present myself. So that's the year I bought Rex, my pickup truck, and I just like that.
Oh,
This is how I
I
want to
remember.
appear. I loved my truck so much. But a couple cool things about when I was writing notes for this perfection year was that so perfection years go from birthday to birthday, right? And this is just one timing technique. Another technique is a solar return chart, which is basically the chart for your birthday, your solar
Hmm.
return. So my solar return chart for age 24 was a Gemini rising chart with Mercury in the eighth house of transformation. So that year was heavy Mercury because I had a solar chart ruled by Mercury. And then, like I said earlier, Mercury has its joy in the first house. So, first house perfection, Mercury is also involved in to some extent. So, another, like I said, I talked about it earlier, being this year was my hangman year. But that year, the system we use for finding our tarot cards for the year was a strength card year. And so adding this all together, Mercury can be known as a shapeshifter in mythology. And so I was literally transforming Mercury in the eighth house, Mercury shapeshifting my body through a strength training, through through
Hmm.
like strength and endurance through kickboxing. And it's also cool. I like to find all these tiny little pieces and put them together. But another cool thing about that is the strength card is the card in tarot that corresponds to the sign of Leo. And of course, my first house is
Hmm.
Leo. So it's like this whole like mishmash of cool things.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. I love all
uh,
the connections.
right? I was like, it's just silly little breadcrumbs. But to me, it just
Hmm.
feels like there's enough breadcrumbs that it makes a difference. And like,
Right.
this has to be things are consequential, right? This has to have meaning if there's so
Hmm.
many fingers pointing at this thing.
Hmm.
But also, a side note, again, I should have a little editing jingle that says Cleo's side notes.
Be like a pop-up
Ding.
video like
Yeah.
MTV. Like,
But if any listeners want to learn more about any of these techniques like perfections or the tarot year cards or even just like the astrology of tarot, let us know in the comments and I'm sure we can put together some materials because I was teaching the astrology of tarot on an app called AstroStar earlier this year and last year, but I had to step back due to time constraints for working these videos with you and my community membership. But I think those are all really cool things because both Michelle and I use them in tandem and it just brings another layer of
mhm.
whoa, that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It can be really interesting for sure when they line up very clearly.
I think I just want to jump into a few chart examples and then we can start wrapping up. We touched on some different things about the first house planets, which are really cool. Let's see.
I will say that also in my first house perfection year, and we talked about this in the 12th house, was that because my Venus is in my 12th house, towards the end of that, I was starting to get really into this idea of dressing like my Venus in Scorpio. And
Mm,
then for my first house year, was very focused on how I was presenting myself and like appearance and stuff like that. So it
yeah,
definitely like also showed up for me in that same way. But where it was like, yeah, I want to look good.
absolutely. Yeah. So we touched on your Mercury in your first house of Sagittarius, but I just made a note that you said you're not into the little details. You want to see the bigger picture. But I like the idea of Gemini being like the basics, because when we think of Gemini, it's like elementary school learning, and then Sagittarius is higher education learning, vocational,
Mm-hmm.
university, college, whatever. But for a while, you were teaching the entry level writing courses, which
I
would
still
be,
am. Yeah,
oh,
that's
okay, you
my,
still
yeah,
are. Cool, yeah.
yeah.
So you're teaching entry level courses to college students, which I think was like a cool mix up of Mercury and Sag.
Yeah, because I specifically wanted to teach at community college too. Like I was like, no, I want to teach community college. That's like where I was interested in doing that. But like my own personal fulfillment, right, comes in from the higher education, like big ideas, because my Leo moon is in my ninth house. And so it's, I think in that sense, I'm a lot more, well, I really want to talk about those things and think through those ideas and get some kind of personal fulfillment from them that I don't quite get from my job, and the way that the things I get personal fulfillment from are not the same things that I like to do in my job, I guess is what I mean.
Mm,
So
yeah, absolutely. And then also with your Saturn there, just literally the dedication and the years of schooling you went through to get to where you are in the education realm. So those are definitely two awesome examples of planets in the first house. Let's see. I'm going to pull up Mr. Danny DeVito. I almost didn't have chart examples, and then I felt bad because we did chart examples for our last one. I feel like first house is a little bit easier to see than 12th house planets wise, so I almost
mhm.
didn't do it, but we can just take a quick look at two people. Danny DeVito here has Mercury moon in his first house of Sag also.
Mhm.
So Mercury, like I said, is like the trickster or the shapeshifter god. And so Mercury is really good for improv acting, improv comedy, stuff like that, because you're able to get into the other characters. So
Mhm.
Danny DeVito has done a bunch of different roles and he's really good at just adapting to that. And the moon also can speak to, when you think about the moon phases just like constantly changing and moving, the moon's always somewhere else in the sky, like at various points in the month. So that adaptability you need to be an actor. And then also we've got his, so I didn't really touch on this, but the, to me in my practice, the ruler of the first house slash the ruler of the ascendant, I call the chart ruler. So it's the planets that's going to be most important for you throughout your life. So
Mhm.
his ruler is up here in his 10th house of public career and public reputation. So his career is guiding his whole shape shifting and acting career. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then another one, we've got Leonardo
Oh boy.
DiCaprio. He's got a good stack of planets. We've got Pluto, Moon, Uranus, Mercury, all in Libra in the first house. And his Libra first house, his chart ruler is down in the second house. So the way he makes
Mhm.
money and income and how he has financial stability all wrapped up in his shape shifting or his ability to, you got Pluto is like rebirth, so his ability to re-envision characters he's stepping into or to add the emotion. We've got the moon there also with this example, adding emotion into the characters he portrays. And then Uranus Mercury, like I said, Mercury talking about improv. Uranus there, I feel like is super improv. Like you're able, like super on the spot, lightning quick wittiness, able to really switch roles and say yes and any character that you're playing. So I thought that was a cool example too.
Oh, that is interesting.
So
Hmm.
those are just my two quick guys. Do we have any final thoughts on the first house?
Find out your birth times so that you can know what your first house is.
Yes, birth time is so, so, so important. Also, I think maybe that would be a good house episode to have also. What do you do when you
Hmm.
don't have a birth time? How can you go to investigate it or rectify it? Things like that would be probably helpful to have in this series.
Mm-hmm.
So if that sounds interesting, if you don't have your birth time, comment below and we'll help you out. That's my little salesperson. So yeah, because of all these reasons, I think the first house is the most important house in the whole system, strictly because it simply creates the chart. You don't have a
Mm-hmm.
chart without the first house. You have planets and signs, which is very helpful. But with all the examples we've given today, having those houses in place really drive home where you're going to see these themes play out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Yeah.
Woohoo! We did it, and we did it in one take, one recording episode.
Good job.
Yay! All right, guys, thank you for being here, and we'll see you later.